Warlord Draven Kahl had conquered 11 worlds by the time he was 200 years old. He had broken armies, toppled empires, and made kings kneel in the dust of their own capitals. He had also once owned a human, not a soldier, not a slave in the way his people understood slavery. The humans were too valuable, too strange, too stubborn for that. He'd taken him as a prisoner of war, a trophy from a skirmish nobody remembered the name of. A single human engineer, captured, chained, and expected to break like everything else Draven had ever conquered. He didn't break. And 3 years later, that same human would be the only reason Warlord Draven Kahl was still alive, standing between him and an assassin's blade, for a master who had never once called him anything but the prisoner. If you're new here, welcome to HFY, where humanity gets underestimated right up until it isn't. Subscribe because this story's about to get good. Let's begin. The Kahl Dominion didn't take prisoners for mercy. They took them for use. When Draven's fleet crushed the mining colony at Perrin's Reach, he expected the usual haul, or weapons, maybe a governor to ransom back to whatever human authority still cared. What he got, buried in a maintenance bay, was a single unarmed engineer named Tomas Reyes, 34 years old, covered in grease, still trying to reroute power to a colony that was already lost. "Delay the killing," Draven had said, mostly out of curiosity. "This one keeps working while the ceiling's on fire. I want to know why." Tomas didn't answer him with words. He answered by fixing, 3 hours later, a reactor coupling on Draven's own flagship that 4 Kahl engineers had declared unfixable. Draven kept him. Not out of kindness. The Kahl didn't have a word for kindness that didn't also mean weakness, but out of the same instinct that made him keep a good blade. Useful things got kept. For 3 years, Tomas Reyes lived in the lower decks of Draven's flagship, the Ashbrand, doing the work no Kahl engineer wanted and every Kahl engineer needed. He ate scraps. He slept in a maintenance closet. He was never once thanked, and never once, as far as Draven's crew could tell, treated as anything more than a very talented tool. What Draven didn't understand, what 700 years of conquering had never taught him, was that humans didn't measure loyalty by how they were treated. They measured it by what they chose to do anyway. It started, as these things do, with ambition wearing someone else's face. Commander Ithar Voss had served under Draven for 40 years, and for 40 years, he told himself the Warlord's throne should have been his. Draven had grown, in Voss's private opinion, soft. Too curious about the alien species at the galaxy's edges. Too interested in things like human engineering when he should have been burning their colonies for sport. The poison Voss chose was slow-acting and untraceable by Kahl medical scanners, designed by a black market chemist for exactly this purpose. It would be administered during the victory feast celebrating the fall of the Elorian shipyards. 1 cup, indistinguishable from 100 others, handed to the Warlord by a server Voss had already paid. Nobody thought to check with the human. Tomas Reyes had spent 3 years as a ghost in that ship, invisible beneath notice, exactly the way the Kahl liked their prisoners. Invisible people hear things. He'd overheard 2 of Voss's guards discussing the arrangement for the feast in a maintenance corridor, using words that meant nothing to them and everything to a man who'd spent a childhood on Earth watching political thrillers his father loved. He had 2 hours to decide what kind of prisoner he wanted to be. The easy answer was simple. Say nothing. Let the Warlord who'd kept him chained for 3 years drink from a cup that would kill him, and use the chaos to escape. Nobody would have blamed him. Nobody would have even known. Tomas didn't take the easy answer. He couldn't get an audience. Prisoners didn't get audiences, so he did the only thing he could. He made himself impossible to ignore. Tomas walked into the feast hall unescorted, past guards too stunned by the sheer audacity to stop him in time, straight toward the raised dais where Draven sat with a cup already halfway to his lips. "Don't drink that." The hall went silent. 300 Kahl warriors watched a human in engineer's coveralls, still smelling of engine grease, stand between their Warlord and his own cup. Draven lowered it slowly. "Explain. Quickly." "I don't know the chemical," Tomas said, "but I know Voss paid your server, and I know he called tonight the arrangement. You can execute me for wasting your time. But you asked me once why I kept the reactor running when the colony was already lost. This is the same answer." "Which is?" Because it was still my job to try. The medical scan, run, finally, on Tomas's insistence, by a Kahl physician who clearly thought this was beneath him, took 4 minutes to confirm the poison. 4 minutes that ended with Ithar Voss in restraints, and Warlord Draven Kahl staring at the human prisoner who had just saved his life for absolutely no reward at all. "You could have let me die," Draven said, once the hall had cleared. "You could have run in the chaos. I could have. Why didn't you?" Tomas thought about 3 years of maintenance closets and scraps and never once being called by name. He thought about it honestly because he owed the Warlord that much. "Because you never once asked me to be loyal," he finally said. "You just gave me work worth doing, and let me do it right. Turns out that's enough for people like me. We don't need to be treated well to choose the right thing. We just need the choice." Draven Kahl had conquered 11 worlds by breaking things, armies, empires, wills. He had never once considered that the thing he couldn't break in 3 years wasn't stubbornness. It was character. And character, he was beginning to understand, didn't answer to chains. He freed Tomas Reyes that night, not as a reward exactly, because the Kahl didn't reward prisoners, but as something closer to an apology the Warlord didn't have the vocabulary for. He offered him passage home, full pardon, safe transport to the nearest human colony. Tomas turned it down. "The Ashbrand's reactor still needs someone who actually understands it," he said. "And frankly, Warlord, you need someone around who'll tell you when your own commanders are trying to poison you. Seems like a gap in your operation." Draven laughed. A genuine laugh, rare enough that half his crew had never heard it, and for the first time in 3 years called him by his actual name. "Chief Engineer Reyes," he said. "Effective immediately. Try not to let it go to your head." Tomas Reyes served aboard the Ashbrand for the next 9 years. No longer a prisoner, no longer invisible, the first human in Kahl Dominion history to hold formal rank aboard a Warlord's flagship. When historians later asked Draven Kahl what had changed his infamous stance on human inferiority, he gave the same answer every time, in every recorded interview for the rest of his long life. "I underestimated exactly one thing," he'd say. "Not their strength, not their technology, their loyalty, the kind that isn't bought, isn't chained, and isn't owed. The kind you only earn by accident, while you're busy trying to break it." If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe. New HFY stories drop every week right here. And let me know in the comments. Would you have warned the Warlord, or taken the chance to run? I read every single one.